Hi there, welcome back to the channel, the smallest music channel on the internet. You've read the title. Today it's the Mac Studio versus a PC build. A mainstream PC build at that. Also, towards the end, I'm going to introduce a couple of wild cards, and we'll see where that takes us and whether that changes the equation. Who do you think is going to come out on top today? I already did a Mac Mini versus the PC world, and that didn't come out very well for one of those contenders. Anyway, let's go to the computer, look at the specs, then we'll break down the specs in more detail. We'll talk about unified memory and how that impacts the equation here, and we'll talk about some other things as well. Let's go to the computer and take a look at the specs now. Okay, here we are in the spreadsheet. If you already went through the spreadsheet with me with the Mac Mini, this is laid out very similarly. You're not going to have any trouble understanding it if you already understand tech, because this is going to be in the same format. What I'm going to do is go through these specs very quickly. Then we're going to talk about our specs, the entire story. And they're absolutely not with the Mac Studio. They're more so with the Mac Mini. But with the Mac Studio, the specs don't tell you the whole picture. Let's get on with this. We have our Mac Studio here, and we have a Puget Systems build over here. Puget Systems is a respected integrator of components. What you do is you go to their website, you go through a grocery list of the different components that you need to put together a PC, like the CPU, the motherboard, the RAM, the storage devices, and you can select from some predefined items that they have in that list. It's not everything on the planet if you were, say, building a system yourself, but it's some respected, good quality components to put a system together. Once they've built it, they test it, and then of course they send it to you. Let's go through this and we'll compare these two systems. The price is $14,099 for a fully loaded Mac Studio, and you're going to see what that entails. The Puget Systems build that I put together is $13,747. I would call this a negligible difference here. We're basically at the same price point. So I'm not going to say that this one has the PC has an advantage here. I don't think so. This is close enough. For the CPU, you're going to get the M3 Ultra. That's the top of the line currently in a Mac Studio. For the Puget Systems build, you're going to get an AMD Threadripper 9970X. If you were to buy that off the shelf, it would cost you $2,699.99. And by off the shelf, I mean at a reputable retailer like Amazon. Cores and threads. You get 32 cores on the Mac Studio. You get 64 cores and 128 threads on the Puget build. The Passmark multi-core score on the Mac Studio is 73,000 and change, almost 74,000. It's significantly higher on the Puget Systems build, 110,000 and change. The motherboard on the Mac Studio is proprietary. On the Puget Systems build, they are using a Gigabyte TRX50 Aero D. If you were to buy this on Amazon, it would cost you $602.90. RAM for both systems is 512 gigabytes of RAM. You can upgrade the Puget Systems to 1 terabyte of RAM. That is possible on this motherboard. Our primary storage on the Mac Studio is 16 terabytes of RAM, and that's really two 8 terabyte NVMe M.2 drives rated at 8,000 megabytes per second transfer rate. So that would actually fill up both this primary storage and the secondary storage, and you only get 2 slots on the Mac Studio. On the Puget Systems build, I chose an 8 terabyte NVMe 7,000 megabytes per second drive. For the secondary storage, I chose a 4 terabyte NVMe Gen 5 with a transfer rate of 14,100 megabytes per second. This is important for me, or it would be important for me as a composer with a lot of sample libraries. this is going to be a very fast drive for loading my sample libraries. For the third storage device, I selected the same device again, giving me that very fast transfer rate. For the fourth storage device, I chose a 4 terabyte NVMe with a 7,000 megabytes per second transfer rate. Now, I might consider switching these two drives here, making this drive here the 8 terabyte drive and making this primary storage a 4 terabyte drive. 4 terabytes would probably be enough for all the software I'm going to put on the system, as far as Cubase, any editing software, all my Adobe suite, plus my operating system. And then this 8 terabyte drive over here I would use for my video, and I would use these two 4 terabyte drives here for my sample libraries. That would serve me pretty well, I believe. And you can see the total here is actually 20 terabytes of storage. Over here we have 16 terabytes. Not a huge difference, but a difference. Next we have our GPU, our graphics processing unit. You can think of it as the graphics card. It's proprietary with 80 cores on a Mac Studio. For the AMD Threadripper build, I chose an RTX 5060 Ti with 16 gigabytes of dedicated RAM just for the video. For the power supply unit, it's proprietary on the Mac Studio. For the Puget Systems build, we get the SuperFlower, and it's a gold-rated power supply with 1300 watts of power. That should give us plenty of expansion capability. We're not going to run out of power if we add more drives. We could also add additional graphics cards as well. Next up is the case. That's proprietary on the Mac Studio, and to me, from the pictures, it looks kind of like a slightly larger Mac Mini, and it's pretty cute. For the Threadripper build, we're going to have Fractal Designs 7 Black, which is a pretty nice case. It's basic, and that's all we need. For the CPU cooler, it's proprietary on the Mac Studio. On the Puget Systems build, it's going to be an AIO CPU liquid cooler. So AIO just means all-in-one, and a liquid cooler is going to keep our CPU nice and cold. Thermal paste is included on both systems, and so are the fans. Neither system comes with a mouse and a keyboard, and I just decided to pick one off of Amazon, and I chose a Logitech MK235 keyboard and mouse combo. It's $22.99. That's not figured into these prices up here. That would be an additional cost. These are wireless devices, the mouse and the keyboard, so that's useful. It means they come with just one dongle that you'll plug into a USB port. If these were a wired mouse and keyboard, that would take up 2 slots. Few notes down here. Mac OS is included with our Mac Studio. Windows 11 Pro 64-bit is included with the Puget build. We get a 1-year limited hardware warranty and 90 days of tech support with our Mac Studio. With the Puget build, we get lifetime labor and lifetime tech support. We also get 3 years of parts as far as the warranty is concerned. You also get a free t-shirt or a mouse pad or something else. They've got a swag button that you press and it has a little drop down box, and you can get something for, you can think of it as free, but at this price, I don't think it's really free, but it's nice that they do that. Here's something that I think is a really nice feature. Optional courtesy install of free software. So as an example of this, you could ask them to install the VLC player. This will play audio and video, and it's free, and they'll just install it for you so you don't have to do it. They'll also install Adobe Cloud. What that is just the front end of the app. So all you would do is go into the Adobe Cloud app, type in your credentials, and then start downloading Premiere, Photoshop, Media Encoder, whatever it is that you use. I also wanted to mention that they have an option of a rack mount system. You can build a system at Puget Systems and they'll put it in a rack mount. That can be very handy. If you already have a server room at your studio or at your house, you can just put it in there, run an Ethernet cable to your desk and use it that way. It's a very good idea from the perspective if you record in the same room that you're sitting and you don't want all that fan noise. Let's look at our first wildcard. Our first wildcard is a PC we are going to build ourselves. The CPU I chose was an AMD Ryzen Threadripper 9960X. Not as powerful as this Puget Systems CPU. I did let you know what it would cost to do the upgrade because my plan here was to keep the price under $10,000. This has a pass mark of 83,615, which is more powerful than the Mac Studio on paper. We'll talk about other things later. If we wanted to upgrade to the 9970X, that would cost us another $1,100. And as we know, that would give us 110,411 on the pass mark. We could also go for the 9980X. That would cost us another $3,600. But that gives us a whopping 149,000 and change on the pass mark, which is more than twice as fast as the Mac Studio as far as CPU power is concerned. I used the same motherboard, and let's talk about this motherboard now. $602.90 from Amazon gets us 4 times M.2 slots. And remember, those M.2 slots are those stick-of-gum slots where we can put those NVMe solid-state drives. We also get dual Ethernet, 10 gig and 2.5 gig. So why would you need that? Well, having a dedicated port, what you can do here is put a NAS on this port with your fastest Ethernet. And by NAS, I mean network attached storage. Now, obviously, we have a lot of options inside our computer to do storage. But if we want to do it on a NAS, we could do it that way. You may be working with other people and you need to share your work. So this would be an option. Then we can use our 2.5 gigabit Ethernet to surf the web or do other things. Next, we get 8 times SATA. What this allows us to do is add additional storage devices inside the unit. These could be spinning hard drives. They don't need to use an NVMe slot. They go on a SATA interface. So we can put some spinning hard drives in here if we need some extra storage for projects and whatnot. Very useful from that perspective. We can also put solid state drives in here on this SATA interface. Not a bad choice as a boot drive if you don't need it to be super fast on booting up. Also, we can use this to add a CD, DVD, Blu-ray burner. That might be an idea for these SATA ports. There's a lot of options there. We also get 2 times USB 4, which is incredibly fast, 11 times USB 3.2, and there's different variants of that. That's why I put the asterisk. You also get 4 times USB 2. Now, a lot of people might ask, why have these slow ports? A keyboard and a mouse doesn't need a fast port, so you're not going to occupy your faster ports. You plug your keyboard and your mouse into these ports. You can also plug your printer if you have one into these ports. You also get Wi-Fi 7. As far as RAM, I decided to go with the same amount that we have in these two systems, 512 gigabytes. You can see that's a big chunk of change. This is pretty fast memory as well. Next up, for drive number 1, we're going to have a 4 terabyte M.2 drive. We have 4 M.2 slots, and we're going to be filling them all up. There's the speed of the drive. We're going to go with a 4 terabyte 9100 Pro by Western Digital, and that's a super fast drive. We're going to add 2 more 8 terabyte drives down here for a total of 24 terabytes. This build over here had 20 terabytes. And this one has 16 internally. This one here has 24 terabytes. Next, our GPU. I chose a pretty beefy GPU, an RTX 5080 with 16 gigabytes of RAM. For music production, this is probably a little bit over the top. For me, generating videos for YouTube and having to encode them, it would be nice to have a nice fast card like this. There's actually a Passmark score for video cards too, and this one is 34,265. That's a really good number. I think my current card is about 22,000. So this is about a little over 50% more. It's relatively expensive, $1,099. You wouldn't necessarily need to go with a graphics card this powerful. You could go with this one over here and you could save about $700. You could also go with a very basic card like this Asus GT730. This would allow you to connect 4 1080p monitors, and it costs about $112. But you'll have a much better experience with a better card. Also, you'll be able to connect 4K monitors, 8K monitors, and you'll have a lot of graphics processing power. Also, this isn't a gaming build, but if you wanted to play some AAA titles like Cyberpunk, this card is going to help you out. As far as the power supply is concerned, chose the same power supply. As far as the case, I decided to choose the Lian Li 011D Evo RGB, which means it's going to light up a little bit like a Christmas tree, but that's okay. This is an eATX case, which is important. We need a larger case to fit this server grade motherboard here, or workstation motherboard, I should say. It's $164.99 for this case, and that's a pretty good price. We have a Corsair Nautilus 360RS liquid cooler. That's the CPU cooler. This is a pretty good cooler for the price. It's right at $100. It's well respected. A lot of people really like this liquid cooler. Thermal paste, we just go with the Arctic MX4 thermal paste like we did when we were talking about the Mac Mini. It is a little bit more spendy at $9, but spending 10 grand, $9 is, budget dust. For our OS, we are going to need a Windows copy, and so we're going to use Windows 11, and we're going to get it on DVD. You can get it on USB for $30 more, and I talked about this in the last episode. What I didn't really say in the last episode is when I did my build 6 years ago, I opted for the USB option. It's really nice just to be able to plug that thumb drive into a USB port. And then when you turn on the computer for the first time, it's going to scan the different ports and look for drives, and it will find this copy of Windows here and say, hey, I found a copy of Windows. Would you like to install it? And then you can say yes and follow the prompts. As far as the keyboard, I chose the same keyboard as these two items over here, and here's the name of it, the MK235 from Logitech. There is a more expensive option if you want to go with it. There's a 345. What you get with the 345 is something to rest your palms. You get a palm rest on the front of the keyboard. Some people like that. Personally, I use a gaming keyboard. Not that I'm a gamer, I'm not. I just like the mechanical feel of it, and you can just beat the heck out of a mechanical keyboard, and it just takes it all on its stride. But these are a good option also. One thing I said in my last episode when talking about these parts is these are not Acme parts. These are not parts that Wile E. Coyote uses when he gets his rocket skates and tries to go after the Roadrunner. These are all name brand components here, like AMD, Gigabyte, Nimbus, PNY, Superflower, Corsair, Lian Li, Arctic, and of course Microsoft Windows and Logitech. All well-known companies. You can save money by going cheap and buying some of the off-brand stuff, especially on the drives. You can save $50, $100 in certain places. Down here we have a list of notes, and I just want to go over these very quickly. There are 10 USB ports on the back panel. That's a lot of connectivity, and more than there are on the Mac Studio. Headers for other USB connectivity are inside, and there are some top mount ports on the Lian Li case. So you could have some ports on the top towards the front that you could plug something into, like an ingesting station for Red Mags or UHS SD cards for your, your ProRes or Sony cams, whatever you're using. Mac has a unified memory system. I'm actually going to talk about that after I'm done with the specs. So you might want to stick around for that. And I know some people would be power typing at me if I didn't talk about it. Before I go back and I start waffling at you about the specs don't give all the details, I have one more system I want to run by you very quickly. A starter system. Not many people have 10 grand, let alone $14,000 to spend on a system. Here I have a starter system with a few kind of quirks that can make it even cheaper. Let's talk about it. I decided I could go with an AMD Ryzen Threadripper 9960X. And that's a step down from this processor over here, but the same as this one, $1599. Then I could go with half the memory. You really pay a premium for those larger memory modules. It's twice the size on the memory module, but look at the price. $13.95 here, $42 and change up here. It's 3 times the price, even though it's double the size. You could start off with 256 gigabytes of RAM and probably never look back and never need any more RAM. But if you did, you could add it. It would cost you some money, but you can do it later on down the road when RAM prices have come down for this particular device. As far as the graphics card, I also went a little less expensive on the graphics card. I went with an RTX 5060 8GB. I didn't go with the 16GB Ti version over here. I went with a 5060. This is a respectable card at $300, and it will allow you to run 4 monitors. Next up, we have our storage, and it's pretty simple. 4 terabytes, M.2, 7,200 megabytes per second transfer rate. That'll cost us $199. We can add 4 terabytes more of storage for $179. Or for $179 added to this, we could upgrade this to a Gen 5 drive and have those blazingly fast 14,800 megabytes per second speeds. I'm just saying here you have 4 M.2 drive slots. We're only using 1 of them. We can add more later. Remember, this is our starter system. We're going to use the same Gigabyte motherboard, the same 1300 watt power supply. Yes, it's a little over the top, but we're never going to have to worry about power. We're going to use the same Lian Li case. We're going to use the same Corsair Nautilus 360 RS liquid cooler, the same Arctic thermal paste, Windows OS, of course, we're going to need that, and the keyboard. What does that pencil out at? $4,749.07. That's not chump change. I know a lot of you are saying, oh my gosh, that's a lot of money. You're right, but there's an upgrade path from here to even more processing power and larger drives. Here's something else. You notice that I highlighted some of these items in a kind of an orangey yellow. If I were to buy just the components I need and not the components that are highlighted here, the Gigabyte RTX 5060 8GB, I actually have a 4070 that I think is a 12 gigabyte card. So I already have a graphics card that can run 4 monitors. I don't need to buy this. I can just move it over from my current build. Remember, when you buy the Mac, that's what you're stuck with. You don't get to move anything over. Also, I don't need drives. I don't need any drives. I can move all of the drives in my current machine to the new machine. There are enough ports for all the SATA drives I have and the M.2, with actually one slot left over. I have 3 M.2s on my current build, so I would still have one remaining. And I would use a few of the SATAs, and that would give me all of my drives in the new system. I don't need a 1300 watt power supply. I already have an EVGA in my current build. I don't need a case. I already have a case. And it just happens to be one that will accommodate an EATX motherboard. I also don't need any thermal paste. I have like 3/4 of a tube left. That may or may not be enough. These chips are incredibly big compared to just regular desktop chips. I might have to buy a tube of thermal paste, and quite honestly, I'd be mostly tempted to have a fresh tube of paste to use. I didn't orange out the cooler, and that's because the cooler in my current build won't work with this motherboard, this particular motherboard we have here, the TRX 50. And the chip is so much bigger. So I would buy the Corsair Nautilus 360 RS liquid cooler. I think that would be a good choice. As far as Windows, of course, I'm going to need Windows 11. I already said I'm going to get the thermal paste. As far as a keyboard and mouse, I'm not going to need a keyboard and mouse. I already have a keyboard and mouse. That wouldn't put my price at $4,749.07. It would put it at $3,696.97. That's not a bad savings, about not quite $1,100. A significant savings if I want to utilize some parts and bring them over. What I could probably do is buy some cheaper parts and keep my other computer still running. I could buy a smaller power supply, just what it needs. If I was to build this starter system here at this price I told you, a similar Mac Studio with the M3 Ultra and 4 terabytes of M.2 storage and 256 gigabytes of RAM, that would cost me $8,099. You can see this is significantly cheaper, and even more so if I reuse some parts. You don't get to do that on a Mac. Also, if I want to add storage to one of these systems here, the Mac system or this starter system or the system I might make for myself at a budget, to add a 4 terabyte storage drive costs me $200 in PC land. On the Mac, it costs $1,200. That's a big premium to be paying. At this time, I'm going to hand you back to the other Jeff, and he's going to tell you all the things that the specs don't tell you and more. Oh my gosh, that was intense. In just a moment, I'm going to sum it all up. I'm going to summarize the specs and tell you what they don't tell you, what's good about them, what's bad about them. I'm also going to talk about unified memory that is present on the Mac. But I want to say a few things just before that. First of all, I'm not using the teleprompter, so I'm trying not to make any mistakes, but I'm only human. When I do make mistakes, I try to just cut them out by, chopping the video. The other thing is, I'm not trying to be mean about the PC, and I'm not trying to be mean about the Mac. I think everybody knows that I'm a PC user, but I always say the best tool for the job. And it's your money and you can spend it however you wish to do it. Here I'm just talking about 2 different platforms, talking about what they can do for you and the pros and cons of each. Let's talk about unified memory. Unified memory just means one pool of RAM, random access memory. On the Mac Mini and the Mac Studio here, the CPU and the GPU share that pool of memory, and they pull from that pool of memory. On the Mac Studio, maxed out like it is in today's spec that I showed you, 512 gigabytes of RAM. That unified memory is not a problem. There are lots of RAM resources for both the CPU and the GPU. When it becomes a problem is when you have a heavy CPU load and a heavy GPU load, and you don't have a lot of resources here. The CPU and the GPU start fighting for the resources that are available. So how can that happen? The Mac Mini. The Mac Mini would just be a terrible computer for me. Maybe not for you, but for me it would be terrible. I have 128 gigabytes of RAM in my music computer. I thought that 64 would be enough, and I just decided to spend the extra money and get 128, and I'm glad I did. Within a few weeks, I was using 80 gigabytes of RAM regularly on projects. Let me tell you how it pencils out for me on my PC. On a Mac, it might be a little bit different. It might be worse or better. I don't know. Here's how it works for me. When I turn my computer on and it just boots up and it's sitting there, it's used 4 gigabytes of RAM. That's loading up Windows and just everything's working and the screen is up, and there you have it. As soon as I access Cubase and I load Cubase up, it goes from 4 gigabytes of use to 6 gigabytes of use. If I decide to do some light orchestration, so I load in the Cremona Quartet from Native Instruments, 2 violins, a viola, and a cello. That's 14.4 gigabytes. Now, I load a lot into RAM because I don't like latency. I like to have it very responsive to my fingers. You can stream more off of the disk and make the disk work harder and not put so much into RAM. But that's the way I like it. So now I'm at 6 gigabytes of use, plus another 14.4. That's 20.4 gigabytes of memory already used. Imagine that on a Mac Mini if it translates over about the same. And I don't know if it will or not. That's a lot of RAM already gone. You load up Damage, I load up a couple of other orchestras that I want to use, maybe a choir and some piano. On a Mac Mini, I'm out of resources. And even if I'm lucky enough to squeeze it all into 31 gigabytes of RAM, that only leaves 1 gigabyte for the GPU. That's not going to run a 4K screen. At least I don't think it will. It'll run a 1080p screen, but not very well. And if you have multiple monitors like I have, 1 4K and 3 1080p screens, it's just not going to be enough. So I don't think the Mac Mini is a bad product because it has a unified RAM. It can be useful for video editing, very useful. But it wouldn't work for me for my music production, and it might not work for other people. The big benefit of a unified RAM is that for some applications, you need to copy data from the GPU to the CPU. And that takes time. On a PC, it takes time. It's a very, very fast bus, but it takes time. No denying that. On the Mac Mini and on the Mac Studio, because they're sharing the same RAM, all that the computer has to do, the GPU says, you want that? It's over here. It just points to it and the CPU goes, got it, there it is. That's a lot faster than having to copy it over. All you have to do is tell it where it is, and that's what it does. So I think a unified RAM on the Mac Mini is a big downer. On the Mac Studio, not so much. Not with 512 gigabytes of RAM. That's freaking awesome. Can I say that and still be PG? Hopefully. I may have to bleep that out. All right. Let me just sum up the rest of it. What's the better system if you just need to do music production, orchestral scoring, production in the studio? Which is the best system? Neither. They're both good. Okay, I've said it. Did he say the Mac was good? Yeah, it's going to be just as good of an experience on the Mac as it is on the PC. In fact, if you're just doing pop, rock, country, a Mac Studio maxed out like that is really kind of overkill. And the PC is overkill that the Puget Systems PC I built at $14,000. We know we don't need that much, but for heavy duty orchestral scoring, or if you're using a ton of sample libraries, you need a lot of power. You need fast data transfer from your storage devices. You need a fast CPU. You need some decent graphics ability if you're running multiple monitors. So the Mac Studio does that. The PC system does that. The wild card that I told you that we could do for under 10 grand would do that. My starter system would do that. It would be fine for orchestral. It doesn't have enough storage devices in it to really work well. But if I moved over all the devices from my other system, it would be fine. So, are there any problems? Yes, there are. The same thing about the Mac Mini applies to the Mac Studio. It's one glued together box. What you buy is what you have. And you can't expand it, and you can't service it yourself. And that's a big deal for me. That's the deal breaker for me. If Mac or Apple would allow you access to their technology, to upgrade it, to service it, it would be more attractive to me. I'm not sure I would switch, but it would be more attractive. And that's going to be a big downer. And I said in the last episode, if the power supply goes out on a computer, the computer won't work. If one of the memory modules goes out and you can figure out which one it is, you can run it with one less memory module. You may degrade your performance a little bit, but at least it would work. But if the power supply goes out, you're basically down until you replace the power supply or get it repaired. For something like the Mac Studio, I'm not exactly sure what that entails, but it probably entails sending it away to an Apple certified repair facility. That could be 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, who knows? Maybe the parts are on back order. I just don't know. And not knowing is bad enough, but the fact that it would be more than a day, it might be weeks, because you've got to mail it and then you got to get it back. Most people can't be down, if they're working studio musicians, they can't be down for that long. That would just be horrible. With the PC, I said last time I could order one on Amazon, but I forgot. We actually had a Micro Center move back into the area, and they're about 10 miles from me that way. I could just drive there. It's 10 miles. I could be there in 15 minutes, pick up a new power supply, be back home. Probably the whole round trip is 40 minutes. 10 minutes to install it, boot up the computer. I'm down for 1 hour. That's not bad. But I can't do that with a Mac. Also, I can't pull parts over from a previous build to a new build. And there are parts that really don't age badly, like the power supply. A modular power supply that I bought 5 years ago is still running. It's a really good quality one. It's 1300 watts. I'm going to transfer that from build to build to build, and it's from a good company, EVGA. Nobody is paying me to say any of this. You might say, well, you're saying bad things about Mac. I'm not. The Mac Studio is a fine product, and for most of us, it would work fine. But if it's not user serviceable and if it's not user upgradable, I've already lost interest, because every fiber in my body has been through the experience of upgrading my PCs as I've gotten more work, as I've gotten more things to do, more things that I want to do in music. I've needed more storage. I've needed a more powerful CPU. I've needed more RAM, and I've been able to upgrade my computers and keep them relevant without having to sink another $1,500, $2,000 into a whole new system. There does come a point with every PC system where you're basically at the top of your range and now you need to upgrade. But with the Mac, you spend 14 grand, and if in 3 years you're starting to feel that it's slowing down and you've got all these external devices hanging off of it because you can't expand it internally, that's that's going to be a problem, and it's a big expense. I think for some pro musicians, I don't know what Hans Zimmer uses. If you have that kind of money, you just don't care. You can buy a Mac Studio for all your people, and maybe you spend $60,000, $70,000 and you take it off the taxes, and it's not that big of a deal. But I imagine that Hans Zimmer is not watching this, and the people that are watching it are people that don't have $14,000 to spend on a PC. And I showed you how you could get into it for significantly less than that. Obviously, there's desktop systems that are even less expensive than what I've shown you. I just wanted to be able to do a good Mac comparison. So the last thing before I go, I just want to leave you with something positive. Both the Puget system that I built by going on their site and selecting some of the components and the Mac Studio maxed out are both great systems. They would serve people very well. I've told you about the shortcomings that I find with Mac systems and also the positive things about the unified memory. For video editing, I bet it's awesome. Having that much RAM available would be pretty darn cool. Not that you couldn't put quite a bit of RAM into a PC. You could put in 2 RTX 5090s, each with 32 gigabytes of RAM, and have 64 gigabytes of dedicated RAM for video. It cost you $4,000. But at those kind of prices, people can afford it that are paying that kind of money. I'm on a budget, and maybe you are too. I think that's probably just about it. This was an interesting trip for me looking at both of these systems. You sure do pay a premium for Mac stuff, and it's eloquent in many ways, from the design and the look of the system. But I've talked about some of the shortcomings. PCs, they've come a long way. They're not the PCs of 25 years ago. They're plug and play, they're easy to use, no harder than a Mac, so point and click. And I'm not trying to talk you into buying one or the other. You buy what you want. Thanks for taking the time to watch this episode. I know this is a controversial subject, and I don't want to anger anybody. Sometimes it's like that. I'll see you in another episode soon. Take care.